That'd be fine.
So no, we would cut them up and break them. And
Let's see.
you got what? Eldon knows that too?
No, I got some Bible study right now, so
Oh,
yeah, Psalm 50.
yeah, you decide what you want.
Yeah, if Heaven's not going to work, we can work with something else. But we need to think about it, and we'll talk this weekend or sooner.
Yep.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you yet again. We are looking at the last part of Psalm 50, and we just to repeat some things from last time in case you missed it. Psalm 50 is a prophetic psalm. It's one of a very few number of prophetic psalms. Not prophetic in the sense that all psalms kind of focus on Jesus. They'll talk at times about Christ or about last day things or stuff like that. But this one and two others like it, 81 and 95, are specific that they almost entirely are talking about God prophesying about future events, present events, and past events, kind of all together in one thing. So there's a very much like prophet, Isaiah, Ezekiel, prophetic character to the psalm itself. And they're also kind of bound together because they are linked together by author. Asaph is the title of this, the writer of this one. And he was a Levite, son of Berechiah, one of the leaders of David's choir. Several psalms like this are attributed to him. And the interesting thing is that all the prophetic songs are attributed to him, so they would kind of bind together in a smaller category because they're written by some author. So we left off on verse, let's see here, I believe it was verse 11. So the beginning of the psalm is God comes, and all of the theophany kind of things that we'd expect before him. A devouring fire in verse 3, a mighty tempest, the extent of his call to all people of the world, to the heavens above and to the deeps below. He makes his call. So there is this idea that it begins with God summoning his people so that he can speak to them, right? And then we kind of get to the crux of the matter. Verse 8, not for your sacrifices I rebuke you. So the content of the psalm thus far is, well, the people of Israel they are doing the sacrifices like they're supposed to. They have been, but they're very much going through the motions. We've seen this before in Isaiah talking about these kinds of things, right? So God doesn't need their sacrifices. He desires the sacrifices are a means to an end. The sacrifices are a means in which to show true trust, true love, true focus, true faith, right? He doesn't need the sacrifices themselves. He wants the Israelites' faith. He wants their trust, their worship, right? So he makes a point that he doesn't need these things because everything is already his. Verse 10, every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills, all the birds of the hills, all that moves in the field. But every living, breathing thing that you might bring for a sacrifice, it's already God's. He doesn't need it from you. So it just brings back home the point. God doesn't need your sacrifices. He wants your trust. He wants your faith. Verse 12 then. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Now, the flesh of bulls, a young bull would often be used during the festival of atonement to make atonement for the priests and Aaron. I believe that's correct. There were certain festivals during the year that a red heifer was used, a bull, as opposed to a lamb or a sheep The blood of goats, the sin of the people who placed on a goat, that goat will be sent off into the wilderness, whose name is Azazel. So oftentimes goats are used for making atonement for the people, as well as sheep and lambs. And usually what's understood is the blood is the life force of the animal. So when the animal is sacrificed, the blood is sprinkled on the altar to, for example, the horns, they call them the horns, but they have two angels in the Ark of the Covenant, and where their wings come out, it kind of makes these horns. So whenever the Bible talks about making atonement, it talks about sprinkling blood on the horns of the altar, these angel tips, these wings. And the blood is placed there. The lifeblood of that animal is placed to make an atonement for sin. And if it's not placed there, much like God on the Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus, if the people wander up the mountain, go past the barriers, God will break out against them and exact his wrath, his justice on sinful people. In much the same way, if the blood's not sprinkled on those horns of that Ark of the Covenant top, God will break out of there and exact his justice on the people. So, long story longer, the idea here is that the flesh of bulls, the blood of goats, these are things that are used in ritual sacrifice to make atonement of sin for people. And God's saying, when you offer them up to me, do I eat them? Do I need them? Do I drink this blood? Is it necessary to me for sustenance? Now, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but pagan worship, whether Greek or Persian or the Canaanite gods in the land of Israel, Baal, Dagon, Ashtoreth, well, Dagon would have been but Ashtoreth, and other gods, right? Normally, how the priests and whatnot are getting by is that they're saying, yes, Baal or other gods are consuming these things that you're offering, when in reality, the priest is taking those things, either eating them himself or selling them and using the money himself. So God's asking an honest question. All the other gods, all the other priests in the land, of foreign gods, of idols, they are living off these things. Do I need them to live off of? No. In fact, all of the meat sacrificed in the temple goes to either be completely burnt up or offered to the priests in the temple as a means of supporting themselves, right? So he asks a good question. Do I need these offerings that you're bringing? Do I need the bulls? Do I need the blood? Do I need these things? Are they sustaining these? No, they're mine already, right? The world that's fullness are mine. I don't need them. I'm not hungry. If I needed something to eat, everything is mine anyway. I can eat whatever I wish, right? So not that I think that God is in the habit of eating things. We don't have a lot of evidence to suggest that God the Father eats. Of course, we know Christ eats. He does it several times in the Bible, but does God require sustenance? He's a spiritual being. He is above everything. Does he need to eat to sustain himself? I don't think so. That's a guess, but I think it's pretty well-founded guess. So he makes a point. I don't need these things, right? I made them. I made them by speaking my word. Why would I need to eat them? Rather, look at verse 14. Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving and perform your vows to the Most High. Call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. So, what does God want? He wants Thanksgiving would be a recognition of the fact all my blessings come from God. I will recognize Him and give Him back this sacrifice. It's not much of a sacrifice of thanksgiving. I'm going to give thanks that He has done this great thing for me. And perform your vows. So I'm wondering, let's take a look at the notes here really quick. Okay, vows. Paying of vows, likewise, is a sign of gratitude to God for answering prayer. Let's look at Leviticus 7:16 just for a moment. And the thing is, that I'm wondering is, what's the difference between paying vows and making vows? Jesus kind of talks about this. Don't take vows that you don't intend to keep. Rather let your yes be yes and no. Um, so does the Lord mean here what he's talking when he says, right? Perform your vows to the Most High. Does perform get the idea of not that you're making vows, but that you're going through the process of keeping those vows? Like performance in the sense of actually fulfilling those vows. I would probably go for the latter, that would make more sense in the context of the fact that they're kind of going through the motions and worshiping God in truly spirit, in soul, in heart, right? Okay, so look at Leviticus 7:16, which says this. But if the sacrifice of his offering is a vow offering or a free will offering, it shall be eaten on the day that he offers the sacrifice, and on the next day the remains of it shall be eaten. Is a vow offering or free? Okay. I think what the verse is suggesting is that an offering can be a vow offering. If you take a vow and you fulfill it, or perhaps you make a vow that's larger than the offering, but the offering is maybe a sign of that offering. Like, let's have a drink together, kind of like how important contracts are struck today, right? We're going to agree to this, you're going to agree to that. Okay, we agree we agree with one another, we're going to fulfill this contract that was written out. Let's have a drink to cement this contract. Maybe so the sacrifice could either be the fulfillment of that vow, or it could be a sign that we are going to fulfill a vow in the future. Either way, it works. So performing vows to the Most High God, probably in this context, would be a sacrifice that was a vow you made that you're keeping that vow. Right? Verse 15: "Then call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me." So, what does God want? He wants you to give thanks for what he's done for you. And he wants you to keep the vows. And most of the time, when you make vows to God, they're not necessarily for him. They don't make his life better. But vows you make to God, like, I'm going to serve God. I'm going to serve God's people. I'm going to be a missionary. I'm going to be someone who takes care of homeless people. So in other words, the vows that you make more often than not aren't about God, but they're actually taking care of other people. So what does God want you to do? He wants you to give thanks for everything that he's done for you. He wants you to take care of other people. It doesn't sound like the New Testament, right? He wants you to take care of other people. And as Luther would say, pray, praise, and give thanks. He wants you to call upon me in the day of trouble. It's the second commandment stuff, right? Call upon me. In other words, don't call upon the names of other gods. Don't call upon other idols that you've created in your life. Call upon the one true God in whom you trust. Right? It's all about trust. Right? I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. I don't think God needs to be glorified, but it seems that we get to play a very wonderful part of the history of all creation in glorifying God. Right? God desires to be glorified. He's got many creatures that glorify him, his whole creation. Inanimate objects glorify him. The mountains sing, the mountains clap their hands, the rivers jump, Psalm 26. So even inanimate objects acknowledge God and praise him. Of course, the beasts of the field and the angels in the heavens, in their own way, they acknowledge God and praise him. And that's what God wants. He wants to be praised for the thing that he has done, which I don't think this is not like an ego thing or a selfish thing. It's almost a rule of creation, right? When the Creator creates everything, the Creator then wants to be acknowledged for creating everything. Seems pretty reasonable to me. So I will deliver you, you shall glorify me. Verse 16. Now he starts off kind of questioning, well-meaning perhaps worshippers who have kind of lost sight of the plot. Right? In other words, Jewish people, Israelites who are going through the motions. He gently rebukes them, but then he changes gears at 16, and he goes in another direction. Now to the wicked, right? Verse 16, but to the wicked God says, what right have you to recite my statutes or take my covenant on your lips? I think the wicked is an interesting way of putting it too, because the wicked does not necessarily, for example, uh, wicked people are Gentiles. Well, some wicked people are Gentiles, but not all Gentiles are wicked people, right? I think we can understand, but God doesn't say Gentiles here. He doesn't say foreign nations. He says wicked. And I think this can be an all-inclusive category, unfortunately, not just dealing with like the foreign nations who seek to overthrow God, but also God's own people who are wicked, right? Who flaunt evil, who oppress the weak, who blaspheme against God and how they worship and the things they say and how they live, right? So the wicked does. I don't think in other words, I don't think the wicked would necessarily mean what we mean towards thinking about Gentiles. The wicked could possibly mean Israelites as well, right? Let's say Israelites genetically or ethnically, not necessarily religiously or spiritually, right? So here we go, and I'm not making a comment on modern day ethnic Jews. That's not what I'm saying. God's people during the time of Psalm 50, some of his people ethnically were not necessarily listening to him and loving him. I just want to make sure I clarified there. Didn't want to come off on there. Okay. So these wicked people who do wicked things, what right do you have to recite my statutes or take my covenant on your lips? So they're talking, you recite my statutes. Statutes wouldn't necessarily be, statutes would be, when we get to Psalm 119, Psalm 119 is an alphabetical psalm. It's 8 verse chunks, and in every 8 verse chunk we have statutes, commands, precepts, and Torah. With those 4 words, and they're kind of splitting things up. We spend a little time researching and we realize that statutes, precepts, commands, and Torah are actually different things, right? And if I remember correctly, statutes would be the additional laws besides the commandments. And then we have precepts would be, or maybe that's precepts. I might be confusing them. So one of them is basically gospel type utterances, God uttering promises, right? Which probably goes better with the idea of promises and then covenant, because covenant is definitely God's promise to his people specifically, right? I will be your God, you will be my people. So if you're in everything in your life, all of your actions are incongruent with the covenant that God has made, with the statutes he's actually told you. What right, how accurate is it to say that these things have any meaning for you? Right? Like, if you're saying I'm part of the covenant, but I'll completely disobey God's commands, I'll worship other gods. I mean, what are we doing? We're talking on one side of our mouth and then talking on the other as well at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense. Because we see what in verse 15 through 18 that this is a group of people who, like, they say maybe certain things, they maybe say the right things, or they want to look like they're doing things, but in reality, they don't seem to care. They do the opposite of God's will. Right? All right, so my statutes to my covenant on your lips. Verse 17, for you hate discipline, and you cast my words behind you. If you see a thief, you are pleased with him, and you keep company with adulterers. So, for you hate discipline, we've been going through Proverbs on Monday mornings, and I think this is exactly what Proverbs is getting at. That God, the way of wisdom versus the way of folly, and discipline is a fear and knowledge of the Lord, trusting in God, reading his word. The discipline would be, living as best as one can according to the Ten Commandments, asking for forgiveness and receiving it when necessary. And maybe, it's funny, we were talking about this last night in confirmation as well, the idea of Christian ethics. I was talking to the kids about that in our table discussion. That how we could improve our country would be to improve the idea of Christian ethics in the world. That we should be a people who always are trying to point out the right thing to do. This is what ought to be done. And I might sound a little preachy, but unfortunately, no one's doing it. No one's saying this is wrong, this is right, this is what we ought to be doing. So yeah, if you hate discipline, you hate God's ways, you hate God's, well, for lack of a better word, rules, commandments. Remember that God's commandments are fences in a good way. They keep us in. They keep us away from dangers. There's a cartoon that's really, I've seen it a bunch of times, where there's this fence, and the one sheep is talking to another sheep, don't go beyond that fence, it's meant for your protection. And the fence is like, well, I don't like being hemmed in. And then right beyond the fence is a cliff to death, right? And of course, this is a metaphorical understanding of like sin in general. Violating God's understanding of the sixth commandment can be very destructive to one's life. Or the fifth commandment, abusing life or even kill it can be very destructive to your own personal sense of self, your own personal self-worth, your own personal hope, life, happiness, all these kinds of things. Hating discipline is it's kind of like hating your parents. It's hating your grandparents. It's hating the people who are trying to form your life and give you good things. It's a silly thing to do. Cast my words behind you. The idea of pearls before swine comes to mind, right? God gives His good word in many different ways in the Old Testament, and they just kind of, what do I need this for? Let's just get rid of it. And then, verse 18, if you see a thief, you are pleased with him. I'm not sure exactly what the okay, this is interesting. This is from I guess the apology, maybe? No, it's Tertullian. It is not enough that we do no such thing ourselves, thief, adultery, unless we break all connections also with those who do. I think we can see, in a way, like we've as human beings, we've had a kind of a narrative of the lovable thief for a long time, right? Robin Hood, you remember that? Not who steals from the rich and gives to the poor. And since it's the rich, it's okay, right? But if you flip that around, you steal it from the poor to give to the rich, we'd be upset about that. Right? So there's a subset of people that it's okay to steal from, but then there's people that it's not okay to steal from. In reality, God would say it's not okay to steal, period, ever. Right? This is the seventh commandment. So why would someone be okay with someone stealing? Well, if you're stealing from the right person, maybe if there's someone you see stealing from someone else you don't like, right? There's three parties in this idea, right? Myself, maybe someone I don't like, my neighbor across the street, and then a thief. Well, I see a thief going into my neighbor's house across the street that I don't like, and he's stealing from my neighbor. This is my neighbor's Trump supporter or a Biden supporter, or put in the blank whatever thing it is that you really don't like, right? Somebody that you like to see get their comeuppance, right? Well, then it's okay for that guy to break in and steal from that person's house. And I don't bother public police because I kind of want to see that guy get his due punishment. I think this is what it's kind of doing out here. And the dangerous part is we take God's wisdom and His judgment in our own hands. We're gonna hand out judgment. We're gonna hand out justice. We know better than God who should be punished and who shouldn't be. And so we're gonna kind of watch this guy do his dirty deed and kind of be okay with it, right? you see a thief, you're pleased with him, and you keep company with adulterers. Uh, I think this is something that we do even more. Right? Having sex outside of wedlock is adultery. Whether you want to believe it so or not, and our culture is more often not doing this than not doing it. It's been rare for me not to do, not to have. I have to deal with this issue a lot. Let's put it that way. Of couples having sex outside of wedlock before they're married. It is not what God intended. It is not good. And we sit around and we talk about these things. We laugh about them as though they're a joke. But we know, our city is kind of big, so the scale is such where it maybe wouldn't be as destructive as it might have been in a smaller community. So you go to a small community on the prairie, there's 200 people in town, and there's 2 or 3 people that commit adultery, and you sit down with them at lunch and you laugh about it, and it's no big deal. That'll tear that community apart. Or at least it'll lead to some really hard feelings and terrible stuff. Right, so going back to the idea of Christian ethics, is it okay for us just to stand by and do nothing when evil is happening? It isn't. It isn't. We ought to stand up for what is right, even if it's difficult. Even if it's to stand against someone who's committing adultery. Verse 19, how close were you to that? Maybe pretty close. Verse 19, you give your mouth free rein for evil, and your tongue frames deceit. This is by the way, I should have mentioned it too, like verse 16 through 19 are very common structures of Hebrew poetry, where you have an A section and then a B section, and the B informs on the A, and the A informs on the B. The poetry is not necessarily that the things rhyme, but that they're kind of like comparing and pointing at each other, and the meaning, the deeper meaning, the language, because poetry is we take normal prose type words and then we smash them together in weird ways so that the person has to think about complex, philosophical, artistic, or just the human experience, right? We're trying to elicit understanding in a very complex concept by the methodology of art, right? So in Hebrew here, we have, like, for example, verse 17, just went through. For you hate discipline, and you cast my words behind you, right? So the discipline would be the larger concept, right? Just the general idea of that God's laid out a way in which He wants you to live, and kind of clear. And then the more nuanced idea is that you take His word and you just throw it out, right? Well, this more nuanced thing helps us understand, this idea of hating discipline. And then hating discipline helps us kind of categorize what throwing out your word behind you might mean. Right? So they inform each other, and then this thus Hebrew poetry is kind of made. So verse 16, 17, 18, 19 are all versions of this. You have verse 19, which we're working on. You give your mouth free rein for evil, and your tongue frames deceit. So they're very intimately connected, those two phrases, and how they connect is where the art is, where the poetry is, right? So you give your mouth, you just kind of give it over to evil. You let evil things come out of your mouth in a variety of ways. You don't curb your mouth. James talks about a tongue being a vile, kind of lecherous, dangerous thing that can set communities on fire, right? James, in the book of James in the Bible, James is saying that perhaps we have to curb that tongue, hem it in as much as we can, so that we don't hurt other people. I think this is kind of where Luther goes with the Commandment, when he talks about you should not bear false witness. And he kind of, in the meeting, he basically gets to the point where put the best construction on everything, and kind of ends by saying, if you don't really have anything else to say that's nice, just don't say anything, right? Because saying nothing is better than well, how's that go? A fool, better to be silent than better to be wise and silent than to be a fool and speak and remove all doubt. Something like to that effect, right? Your tongue needs to be curbed. Your tongue frames deceit. So, lies, slander come from your tongue. Deceit would be creating situations, creating stories, creating that are false about people, right? Creating lies. Verse 20, you sin and speak against your brother, you slander your own mother's son. Okay? So verse 20 is a very good example of the Hebrew poetry idea. You sin and speak against your brother, you slander your own mother's tongue. I mean, they're almost the same idea, but one's more nuanced than the other. The idea that you share, the second part is you shared a womb. You shared your mother's womb, and you're saying evil things about this person, right? Verse 21. These things you've done, and I have been silent. Now we see God's listing all these things off. Finally, verse 21, we get back to God addressing. He's like, here are my examples of the things that you've done, right? And in verse 21, God's going to return back to his direct commentary to God's people, to his people. These things you have done, and I have been silent. And you thought that I was one like yourself, right? In other words, it's going back to maybe verse 18, right? If you see a thief, you are pleased with him, you keep company with adulterers, you hate this, but like this idea that you're going to watch a thief break into your neighbor's house and that's it because you think it's a good thing, right? So you think I'm like that I'm not going to speak the truth, that I'm going to sit down in the den of evildoers and scoff and not say the right things. No, that is not God. He is going to speak the truth. So verse 21 at the end, right? You thought that I was one like yourself, but now I rebuke you and lay the charge before you. Right? So now I've waited long enough. I've been patient long enough. Here is your crimes. And he lays them at their feet and he says, these are wrong. You have transgressed my holy will. Like, so God's making a pronouncement of guilt, right? And you can't really argue with God because he knows. He knows everything that you do and you don't even know you do, right? He's laying it all off. Here's the problem. Here, it's right here. And you're guilty. I don't need to prove it before law. I'm God. I know that you've done these things. Here it is. Lay the charge before you. Verse 22. Mark this then, you who forget God, lest I tear you apart and there be none to live. The one who offers thanksgiving as a sacrifice glorifies me. The one who orders his way rightly, I will show the salvation of God. Okay? I'm sure that, by the way, probably verse 23, orders his way as probably Derek, some derivation of the Hebrew word Derek. No way, so it will harken us back to like the Shema, and Genesis 4, things like that. To one who declares his way rightly. So I don't think it's just like things that you would say. I think when it says the one who orders his way right, this is, I want you to listen, digest or listen or read my word while you're walking on the path, while you're lying down, while you're sleeping, while you're resting. Like God's saying, I want you always to be meditating on my word, and I want you to trust in me. I'm your God, you are my people. So walking in the way rightly is an all-inclusive thing. It's law, it's gospel, right? It's admitting sin, but it's also asking for forgiveness and receiving forgiveness. It's praising God. It's following the commandments to the best of your ability, right? Despite sin. Right? You're going to sin, you're going to fail, but walking in the way, living in the way rightly is honoring God's commands, trying your best to live according to his will for your life, trusting in his forgiveness. All this is walking in his way, orders his way rightly. One who offers thanksgiving is a sacrifice glorifies me. So, you come to the end of oh, you're wicked. Look at all these wicked people. God lays down the sin in front of you. Probably your first response is, well, I better go to the farm and grab the best bull and make it really seem like I'm serious about asking for forgiveness. And God says, no, sacrifice of thanksgiving. Look to me and express your thanksgiving that I've done all. Now, of course, this is going to work itself out in sacrifices. It's going to work itself out in offering up lambs or bulls or things like that, because that is going to be the way that you're going to show it. But one of the greatest sacrifices that ever happens is that Jesus is redeemed, the Son of God. The firstborn of Mary is redeemed with the smallest possible offering, 2 turtle doves. And God doesn't look down on that offering and say it's not enough, because it's a sacrifice of thanksgiving. The widow of 2 mites, she gives from her poverty. And it's barely anything at all. So the sacrifice is not necessarily in the land of the sacrifice, but in the heart of the sacrifice. Is there a true sense of spiritual thanksgiving? Do you actually trust the Lord and give thanks for what He's done for you, and then offer up sacrifices of thanksgiving? Yeah? That's more important than what the sacrifice actually is, right? And it's what I've been trying to talk about in our stewardship series as well, getting to the heart of people, making them really think about. It's not about money, it's not about talents, it's not about time, but it is about recognizing that God is everything in my life. I put my trust in Him, and I'm going to offer to Him sacrifices of thanksgiving. Because He's everything around me. Okay? Mark this then, verse 22, just to close. Mark this then, you will forget God, lest I tear you apart, and will be ready to deliver. Right? So 22 is a continuation of 21. He lays this charge in front of them, and then he says, hey, pay attention. Mark this. You who forget about God. In other words, God's giving them a warning. He's giving them a chance to repent. Right? And then he closes the psalm by saying, the one who offers thanksgiving as a sacrifice glorifies me. I will show salvation. In other words, it's not over. There's still forgiveness. There's still salvation in God. But offer, sacrifices of thanksgiving. Don't dwell in your sin any longer. Repent. Believe, trust in God, and offer sacrifices of thanksgiving. Okay? So, an interesting psalm, nonetheless. We have this idea of prophecy, of God speaking to His people. It's kind of hard to date the psalm itself. Was this a pre-exile psalm, which it very well could be. So the punishment that's coming could be understood by the exile, or is this a grander prophecy? Is God talking about things that took place even after Jesus, right? The Great Tribulation, which we're in right now, right? We have been ever since the death and resurrection of Jesus. The cross begun the last days of the world. We've been living in tribulation ever since Christ died on the cross. So, is this time of discipline, this time of difficulty where all this evil is taking place, is that now even, right? And then God's holding out this olive branch saying, hey, mark this. Here's your sins. I lay them at your feet. Mark this and repent. Right? Could it be that? Yes. Could it be a pre-exile? Yes. Could it be, even like there were various times where God used the various tribes to punish the leader, not David's himself, but people that are David's way. There's a lot of places we could stick this. Is this prophecy, a specific time period? I don't think so. I think it holds up. Probably when it was written, it made a lot of sense in that time period, but it still works You know, for example, we sin in mighty fortresses of God, and we can understand that the devil and his forces are out there on the plain, ready to do battle with God's forces. We consider it even now, right? We can apply to events that happened in the past. We can apply to events that are probably coming in our future, right? Doesn't have to be. The Luther, of course, was talking about his time period during the Reformation, doing battle with people who wanted to subvert the gospel, i.e., the Catholic Church and others. So I think it's the same kind of idea. The psalm can be written for a specific time. It makes sense in that time, but it also makes sense in a lot of other times as well. And that's by design, because these problems are eternal. They have, or I shouldn't say eternal, but they are tied to creation, right? Adam and Eve brought sin into the world, so these are all issues about sin, right? Our heart is turned inwards to ourselves instead of turned towards God. These problems are always going to crop up. They're always going to be an issue for us in every time, whether it's the time of David, the time of the exile, the time of Jesus, the time of the Reformation. Now, these problems exist because sin still exists. Right? Sin it won't be done away with in entirety until the last day, where Christ comes, he judges the quick and the dead, and makes all things new in his way. So, we finish up Psalm 50. We're going to skip Psalm 51 and jump right to Psalm 52. We've done Psalm 51 in class before. So, I've never looked at Psalm 52. It's pretty interesting, and I wanted to jump into that one. We're very familiar with Psalm 51. So, we're going to jump into Psalm 52 next time. Look forward to seeing you. But, in this context, I want Dave today to Lord bless you and keep you. I hope your video is a good one, a productive one, and that you will bless the weekend. Make sure to go to church. Make sure to go to your Bible, your pastor Bible study on Sunday. And if you can receive the sacrament, go receive the sacrament.